what's happened now in the 21st century is some of the communities with that legacy, Lafayette, Louisiana is one example. Some of those communities are on the cutting edge in regards to high-speed internet access, stepping out on their own, not waiting for the kinds of so-called competition that we have here in Madison, where you can choose between AT&T and Dish and Charter, where all they are doing is recycling customers. They aren't stepping in, providing the kinds of service that this world needs in the next decade, not in the next 100 years, now. And so we're working on a considerable handicap here in Wisconsin because of the success that the industry lobbyists had in writing the legislation for our legislature. But we do have the ability, and what you're about to see is a report on how we can take Madison into the 21st century and do it rapidly. There are going to be a lot of unanswered questions. Price tag, $150 million. How we cover that price tag is going to be a challenge. But for those cities that are able to do this, we are going to be a world-class city for everyone. This is not just for the engineers, the computer gurus, the gamesters, the hackers, but we're talking about every school, every neighborhood center, every household in Madison, Wisconsin. We've been at this now for close to a year. It's been a commitment of our IT department, led by Paul, our committee, which we brought back from the dead. It used to be our old broadband committee. And we've developed a CTC report, which is going to utilize MUFN, M-U-F-N, you should all know MUFN, the Metropolitan Unified Fiber Network. And it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to deal with the cumbersome burdens created by the state legislation, which is designed to protect the existing companies and keep us away from doing this. But it will actually introduce real competition, not to mention a level of service imagined only by a handful of cities in the world. So with that, let's get to people who know what they're talking about. Barry or Paul, which of you guys?
I think Barry's going to be first.
Barry, you're going to go first?
I guess so.
Professor Barry Orton is one of the rare exceptions where you've got an expert in a field who is actually acknowledged in his own community as to knowing what he's talking about. Professor Orton has been working with us in the city on this subject for quite a few decades and has been giving us sound and great advice. And I don't think we would be there where we are now without his help. Barry?
Thanks, Paul. Okay, in context, now we got the long history, now we're going to the short history. I was the one who compiled this condensation of the executive summary of the actual report. The actual report is, well, all told, it's about 200 pages. The executive summary is about 20 pages, so I thought for your help, I'd try to boil that down, and I managed with the help of 11-point type to get it to 4 pages. So the first page is actually the most recent history, starting with MUFN, Paul gave you why we got into cable and the idea that cable had to serve everybody as opposed to other places where they cherry pick is pretty key. Muffin, the Metropolitan Unified Fiber Network, was essentially a city and school district project with the university, and this is where Paul comes in. That was a $5.1 million federal grant through what was called the BTOP program, Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. Essentially, it was the first Obama administration's one of the shovel-ready infrastructure projects that was part of the package that was a stimulus package. And so we were able, the city was able, with the school district, with the university, to build a fiber network that now essentially serves every public building, not only in Madison, but it extends partially to Fitchburg, to Middleton, town of Madison, Maple Bluff, and so on. And essentially, it's fiber to the premises, fiber directly to the building, to all the schools, all the fire stations, some of the neighborhood centers, the hospitals, this building, and so on. This is an enormous savings in money because previously those institutions were paying AT&T and Charter and the like for rental of phone lines. Now the city essentially owns its own. So now we're in the position of being able to bootstrap on top of that and say, we've got a backbone that we can build on top of to get fiber to the rest of the city. Why is this important? Because unlike the phone company, unlike the cable company, the last mile or the last half mile or the last 100 feet going into your building are, instead of fiber, they're either legacy copper, the old copper phone lines, which they're squeezing telephone and squeezing television and squeezing internet into, or the legacy coaxial cable from the cable company, which also now they're squeezing phone, data, and television signals into. This is the state of the art, which is the high-speed internet that everybody wants, fiber to the premises. That's the FTTP. So the idea is you start with Muffin. Hey, we've already got fiber all the way here, all the rest of the city, and we build on top of that out into the neighborhoods so that the fiber would essentially go along everyone's street, either under the street in most cases, or in some cases overhead where the power lines are, either in front or in back of your homes. And then the report we've got says the next step is you partner with a private sector or several private sector companies to deliver that last few hundred feet. So if I want to sign up, the city doesn't build that right to my home, it builds it past my home, and I would then sign up with a Charter or an AT&T or a TDS or a Google Fiber or a ResTech or another private company or several, who then would provide me service through which I could possibly watch TV, my internet, possibly my phone. So we're talking about a high-speed pipe, essentially, all the way directly into the premises of every potential residence and every potential business in Madison. Huge step up in terms of capacity. So, if you look at the little history in the first couple of pages, we're now starting a pilot program through the Digital Technology Committee's attempt to lower the broadband gap, so to speak, and we're trying to get it into 4 underserved neighborhoods right now. So that's a project that essentially is now in the process. We then needed, if we were going to go any further, we needed to follow the state law. We passed it around. It was enacted in 2004. It set up a hurdle that said any municipality that wanted to get into the broadband business or offering broadband services had to have a cost-benefit analysis done along certain lines, had to make that public, and to have a public hearing on that report. So what we're announcing today, the reason you're here, is this report was just delivered last week to the city. It was first transmitted to my subcommittee, the Citywide Broadband Services Subcommittee, CBS, right? Citywide Broadband Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Digital Technology Committee. Got that right. Lauren, and I'm going to lose the last name, and the mayor probably not going to do it either, so you're going to say it, Lauren, please. Kilishevsky is the chair of the parent committee. And just so you know who's in the room, as well as Paul Kronberg, who is the head of IT for the city. We also have Rich Beatles, you should know about, who was the original staff member for the city on Muffin and has been helping pursue this ever since. So the credit for us having the bootstrap necessary to even think about this goes to city staff and a whole bunch of other people who did this back in 2008 and then built it in 2009, 2010, 11, and so on. So that's how we got to where we are. This report I will give you in a nutshell. I did it in 4 pages, now I'll do it in about 2 paragraphs, if you're ready. It basically lays out all the costs necessary to build from here out completely, assuming that you've got a private partner or 2. And the assumptions are in this 3-pager I handed out. There's a little box showing cost estimates, and Paul talked about 150 million. That's the estimate of what it would cost to build the so-called dark fiber to the premises, build it out through the neighborhoods, but not to every home. It will pass every home. The other higher project amount, 212 million, another 50, 60 some million, would essentially be what the private sector would do to build it from the street to everyone's home or anyone who wanted it. And that would be the cost of the consumer electronics that go into the home, the wires, the service drop, and any network electronics they had to put out in the system. So another 50 million or so to actually light the fiber and get this running. Now here's the key. That's a lot of money. The report talks about how to get it, and we can bond, and we can do a lot of other things, but it basically says if to make this happen, you need a private partner. It's very similar to some real estate operations that the city had been considering, maybe even across the street. How do we build this? Well, yes, if we have tenants. Who are the tenants? How much are they going to put into the pot? What are they going to represent? That's what this report essentially says. Find the right private partners. And this can happen. It's starting to happen around the country with this model. I think the latest 2 models that were mentioned in here were Westminster, Maryland, and Huntsville, Alabama. And the consultants we're using essentially have been working with those communities. So if we find and we negotiate with a partner who'll say, yes, we could do this, yes, we'll agree to put X amount of dollars into this capital fund, then it makes it a lot easier. What also makes it easier is if we're ready next year, it is a possibility, and I'm just talking personally and politically here. One of the candidates for president has been talking a lot about infrastructure, and she has been saying that when she talks about infrastructure, she talks about rebuilding roads, bridges, and broadband. And she's been talking about broadband as a piece of our infrastructure that needs this kind of upgrade, not only in the kind of rural areas that Paul's talking about, but also in a lot of cities. My hope is, and it's just a personal hope, that sometime next spring, we might have had the hearing, we might have had another report that talks more specifically about how to do this and how much it would specifically cost, and we might have had some negotiations with partners by then. So we might be, next spring, shovel ready for whatever federal money is possibly newly available for cities to pursue these kinds of things. That's it in a nutshell, I think. What are the next steps? Next step is this report goes to the full committee on Thursday. I suspect the full committee, which has had it since last Thursday, is not going to have read it fully yet, because I haven't even read it fully yet, and I've tried to summarize the thing. So we're going to have to digest this for a while. Staff is going to have to digest it for a while. Probably what will happen is we'll have a recommendation to the council to hold the formal public hearing necessary by state law. So we'll probably hear from AT&T and Charter at that point, and I suspect all the olders will hear from them privately as well. We'll hear from the public as to whether the public thinks it's a good idea to spend some public money on public infrastructure, or whether they're relatively happy with the private sector and what it does with private infrastructure in this area. So we'll know, and we'll argue this out probably over the next 6 months. And then hopefully if the answer is yes, we might have some shovel-ready proposals that might help us if the federal government gets really interested in doing this kind of infrastructure renewal, as hopefully at least one of the candidates has been promising we're doing. So those are the next immediate steps. Did I miss it? What did I leave out, Paul?
I think you covered just about everything.
Paul, you and Rich wanna share what we'll be doing from a city staff point at this level?
Well, yes, and let me just give a little more information about the Muffin Network. As the mayor and Barry mentioned, this came about through a BTOP grant in 2008, 2009. I wasn't actually here yet, but Rich led the effort with the school district and the university to obtain that grant. Currently, we have about 200 miles of fiber optic cable throughout the city. That is something we hope to leverage for this effort. It connects approximately 80 city facilities, including libraries, fire stations, police stations, this building, municipal building, and other locations. We've also connected 14 community centers in a way to help provide internet service to the public. Muffin itself has approximately 20 anchor institutions, which include the city, Dane County, the university, 3 school districts, Madison, Monona Grove, Middleton Cross Plains, and 2 hospitals, Meritor and UW Hospitals and Clinics, as well as some others. So that's something that we hope to leverage. At this point moving forward, we're going to be working with the Digital Technology Committee on some details of how we move forward. We'll be scheduling a public hearing on this sometime within the next, I'll say approximately 60 days, when we can get that scheduled. And then the information from that will give us and the city information on how we can move forward and what other details might need to be addressed. And that is about all that I have at this point.
The full report can be downloaded. We didn't kill too many trees to give them to you in a hard copy because it's huge, but the link to it is on the back of the handout, so you can download it. I'd suggest if you do, page 9 has a decent diagram of how the system essentially works and where it comes from, how it goes over the city, streets, and then how it gets into customer premises. But the whole report is full of diagrams and charts and dollars, and we're not going to bore you with those at this point.
One of the things, Rich, maybe you can go over it, is to examine these 2 charts. Now, before we do that, let me just explain. They are not at the same scale. And this one is at a much lower scale, but I just want to point out, this is the city of Madison currently, and this is where the city of Madison would be with fiber to the premise. Rich,
Sure. Basically, there are 2 lines on the chart. So there's 2 speeds, and mostly what you hear from commercial vendors is download speeds. And those download speeds are always high. So here in Madison, Charter, I use Charter as an example. We're getting 60 megabits per second download speed and 4 megabits per second upload speed. So on this would show what the city would have with the fiber to the premises. We would have full gigabit speeds down and full gigabit speeds up, which is significant. So this is interesting. It really shows the difference of what we have now and what we'd have in the future. And on this scale, these are show some of the cities around the world, what their current speeds are. We just because these, when you get into the gigabit speeds, the scales were not very good. Everything over here looked pretty small when you're comparing against gigabit speeds, which is true. The throughput is incredibly different, and so list of cities, upload speeds, download speeds. We handed that out.
Yeah, I think that has been handed out,
Okay.
yeah. And I just notice here that there's a couple of US cities that are in the kilobit range. Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, which is where Google made its commitment a number of years ago, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is going it on its own. But when you look over here at a quarter of these kinds of speeds, you've got cities like New York, Washington, San Francisco, who are considerably faster than Madison, but in terms of possibilities, worldwide competition, they're only a quarter of the way there. So this is a major change. Do you want to make any comments?
No, I
Talk
think-
about what you see the committee
We'll
doing?
just jump on that quickly.
Why don't you spell your name for everybody?
I'm Lauren Kilishewski. Do you actually want me to spell my name?
Well, there's print reporters, yeah, they better.
It's Kieli, S as in Sam, Z as in zebra, EWSKI. I'm the chair of the Digital Technology Committee. We will meet on Thursday. Looking forward to being able to discuss this report with the entirety of the committee. And then as time goes by, when we have public hearings and hear what the public thinks and get input from a variety of sources, I'm looking forward to moving forward with it.
Mayor,
Questions?
does this all hinge on the level of city subsidy in order to attract the needed private partners to participate to get it to Allied Drive and these other places at these rates?
I don't think so. I think what is critical is we won't get the private partner unless we're willing to go down this road. And the initial stage here of making the commitment is relatively inexpensive. It's really more of our own time and effort than anything else. The critical question as we get into the details, and this is what will happen over the next year, is assuming that the city's commitment's $150 million, what portion of that over what period of time can be recovered so that the revenue bonds would be paid for by the users rather than have to come from property tax revenues. And we're at the next step of now examining that. And perhaps, as Barry Orton pointed out, if we're ready within 12 months, and there's not a lot of cities at our level of maturity on the subject, perhaps we can be shovel ready if there's any federal assistance forthcoming. Now, in terms of the private partners, I don't know if it's quite as simple as the great sage words from a movie often quoted, build it and they will come. But I do think, given the commitment we've already made, given where we're going with the next steps with the hearing and the review, that will attract the attention of people in the industry. And hopefully within another year or less, we'd start hearing from them.
Mayor, if I could ask on another matter, you are reportedly in support of a modification of existing statute or new statute that would place a ban on approaching vehicles
hang
on
on,
the street.
hang on. We'll get to that. I want to free everybody else on this subject first. Have we answered all the questions that there are?
I guess just a question, where does, or as the committee or city looking at the other systems of like LTE or 5G, has that played into this at all? I know that's different than this system.
This is the kind of system that's required if in the next century, whether it's what I would call less sophisticated uses, I don't want to insult anyone, but less sophisticated uses such as gaming, or more sophisticated uses such as major enterprises that are moving billions of bits of information on a daily basis. This is where it's at. This is what's necessary. And you can see, I mean, you look at what the commitments, it's interesting. You know, you got Seoul, South Korea, Hong Kong, Tokyo, at least in terms of downloading Paris. This is where the competition is. And I don't think it's stretching the matter to say, we get this done and committed to in the next few years, there will be companies we don't imagine looking at Madison not necessarily for relocation, but for starting their businesses here, and then who knows how they'll grow.
Could I
And
supplement
that-
that with a technical answer too, if I could?
Yes,
So
please.
the thing with wireless networks is wireless radios require fiber. Wireless radios require wire. And in order to get the kind of throughput that we're talking about here, we would have to have a lot of towers to support this kind of bandwidth. And in order to do that, you would have to have a lot of fiber. So in order to support a wireless network like what you're suggesting, we would probably have to build a network like this anyway.
What's been the experience of a somewhat similarly sized city like Chattanooga that is on the chart as having the requisite speeds to compete? Or is it still too new there to?
Do a search, do a Google search. Chattanooga, high speed, and there's quite a number of articles and reviews of how they're progressing.
If I understand correctly, the people in their house will still have to be connected by charter or by other company, the last 100 feet. So my question is, what will prevent this company to connect people with very low grade connection?
Because they'll be under contract with us and won't be allowed to use the system unless they meet our standards. It's the same as when we first licensed the cable TV company in the 1970s. To get the license, to get the franchise, to use our resources, you must meet our standards. Yes.
And I know you referenced the 2003 legislative obstacles that we faced, but a lot's changed in the last 15 years, and people like Scott Walker have gone pretty far out of their way to actively, sabotage, even turn away money. Can you talk a little bit more about the legislative environment we're going to face today and the obstacles that we'd have to get through to get a big thing like that happening?
I'm not in political office, so I can talk more freely, maybe. I think you're implying things have gotten worse since 2003.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they have, in the 2007, the legislature, with Alex help, essentially took the city out of regulating cable. And after that, they took the Public Service Commission out of regulating landline phones. So we're in this state, we're in a very deregulation phase. But luckily, they can't, the language of the law as it stands now allows us to proceed. Could they erect more barriers or prohibit this? Possibly. They haven't yet. That would be really difficult to do if we were already under the current state law and moving along legally. Theoretically, yeah, the legislature, with the help of contributions from the industry, could make it harder to do this kind of thing. But at the moment, the current Federal Communications Commission law really has stopped states from